Okay. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Warren Planning Board, Monday, June 26, 6:30. And roll call, Tyler Dixon had indicated that he would not be able to make it, so this is an excused absence. Matt Atwood is not here yet. I expect he will be, but I haven't heard anything on that. Nonetheless, we have a quorum. Herb Durfee, who I introduced at our last meeting, apparently precipitately, is now officially our planner, our town planner, and director of community development. I believe is the title, or yeah, major domo, or as they like to call them in Rhode Island, the czars. We know how those guys ended up, so I don't think that's a name you want, really. Welcome aboard once again. We're delighted to have you, and we look forward to working with you and Allison, who will continue with us on the comprehensive plan. The planner's report here. Is there something you wanted to?
I did put a planner's report on there. It didn't have to be that far up. I'm thinking that as we move forward, you may want to have something like that on a monthly basis. Again, put it wherever you want it on the agenda. But I knew that I was just going to be introduced tonight, so I figured I'd put the two together to try to save some time. My title, I think, is director or something of planning and community development, but I'm figuring out there's a lot of grant management with it. So a little bit of jack of all trades goes with the title. Just a few things that I've been working on so far. Obviously, the comprehensive plan. Alice and I are trying to work more closely in terms of letting her do what she's supposed to be doing, which is the comp plan and nothing else. So I think that's key in order to get that comprehensive plan finished. She and I are going to be better collaborating on sort of preparing a calendar for the future as we move forward, because we want to get to the point where we're finishing up sort of review of drafts. We want to get into the public hearing process so we can get it toward adoption. Part of that will be at Kate's recommendation. The town manager is to have a joint meeting between you and the town council, or this group getting at least invited to a town council meeting, so that prior to the public hearing process. So there's opportunity for the two boards to at least collaborate, make sure you're on the same page before we get into the public hearing process. Because we'd like the public hearing process to serve as much of a rubber stamp as possible, which then also leaves the best time for members of the public that may show up, so we're not in overall disagreement. So that's sort of a strategy that we're working on.
Sorry to interrupt. Someone's cell phone is pinging. Is it possible to turn?
It's his
distracting
computer. Sorry. And then also just want to report a little slow on applications in terms of those coming in the door. Maybe I'm still used to Coventry, where I would be dealing with like 9 public hearings with you in a single night. So for me, that's a little bit of a breath of fresh air, that tend to be serving more as a true town planner rather than a reactionary person to development applications coming in the door. Nevertheless, since I've been here, the applications haven't been pouring in, just giving you the heads up on that. We did receive some positive feedback from what's called the Municipal Technical Assistance Program, whereby there's some funding that's available through Rhode Island Housing, and communities were encouraged to apply. There's some pre-qualified consultants. We're one of the only towns that so far has been authorized to move forward with that. So we're going to be working with Sue Mara again from Weston and Sampson. And the project that I wrote up that we'll be moving forward with is a housing production plan with an emphasis on affordable housing. So if you take the comprehensive plan, think about some implementation of it, what I'm trying to identify is what is the gap between our existing housing stock, where we need to be, and trying to figure out how we're going to fill that gap from that standpoint. So that's something that we've been authorized to move forward on. The reason why many communities are on hold right now is that most of them, given the General Assembly's passage of the housing bills, freaked and said, we need some help because a lot of the deadline is to have your bylaws updated by January 1 of this coming year. So I mean, that's something I freak out on as well. And we'll work on that, but I did something that was a little bit different. Everybody else is looking for model policies and, model bylaws or help in drafting their particular regulations. I happened to go for something that wasn't so focused on that. And so at least a portion of what I applied for was allowed to go forward, which I think is a good thing. There's 3 earmarks that all of you may be aware of that we received a couple years ago, but we're starting to get involved with it. USDA, the Rural Development Program, is going to be responsible for the pass-through of those particular funds. One is an internal construction project related to the Warren Police Department. We got $2.2 million from Senator Reed's office to do that. So I'm working with police department on figuring out how they're going to potentially reconfigure the internal parts of their building to improve their department. Secondly, again, through Senator Reed's office, we were able to secure $2 million for a new rescue station. So that's new construction. And then I'm going to pronounce the name incorrectly because I haven't said it yet, but Representative Cicilline. Right, yes. So $825,000 to deal with construction of some underground cistern for fire protection in areas that don't have public water supply. So I mentioned those because a couple of them have, external construction related things, and you never know, something may come before you some night for a quick sign off. Obviously, on another topic, I mentioned it earlier, the Rhode Island General Assembly passed a glut of housing bills. They were all of the speaker's bills. The deadline looms of January 1, 2024. I've already talked to the town solicitor about looking at our bylaws, seeing what changes that we need to make. There still is a rollout that needs to occur in terms of actually what the bills really said and how that's affecting all of us. That's currently being worked on clearly by various organizations like the League, our solicitor, Rhode Island Housing, as well as some Office of Statewide Planning. So I'm trying to jump on that as quickly as I can. In the interim of waiting for the larger organizations to figure it out, I'm hoping I can figure it out faster and get working on that sort of thing. But obviously that will involve you as a group with regard to preparing bylaws and getting them adopted ultimately. Just interestingly, there were, of all those housing bills, they didn't touch the accessory dwelling unit bill that they passed last year. So that still stands as it currently is adopted or enacted. There are some things that need to be addressed with regard to that, but obviously we're going to have to wait for another legislative session on that. If you've ever heard the term certified local governments, that's an opportunity. If the town were able to get that particular designation, again, certified local government or CLG, if we obtain that, it's an allowance for the community to apply for some historic preservation grant funding. And I've worked with communities in CLGs, both in Vermont, and I had it in Coventry as well. There are a number of things that you have to have as part of that. I think you either have it all already, or you may have to tweak either the Historic Preservation Commission or the Historic District. Again, I'll talk to the solicitor about that to see, but if it's a good program that allows some good funding to come into the community, and knowing that historic preservation or matters of historicness are of good consequence to this community, I think it'd be at least a good source of funding you can do inventories and rehabilitation of buildings and all that sort of thing. So it gives you kind of that planning insight to a particular building or an area first before you dive in and do something to a particular area. So that's why I think it's pretty cool for this community. And then lastly, the Bristol County Route 114 Resiliency Plan will soon be getting underway. The Office of Statewide Planning has a consultant that they're negotiating with. We've had our preliminary meeting with them. And this is essentially looking at the Route 114. I don't know if you know about this, but it's looking at the Route 114 corridor in Bristol County with regard to resiliency. A lot of, if you go on to the state page that shows you the 100-year flood boundary or a lot of 114 is in that area. So with that being an evacuation route and a major route for economy and the three communities, there's something that the state has been doing to look at that. So again, that's in the kickoff mode. That's a pretty good summary of like the last couple of weeks, not including my trip to Italy. So, and that doesn't even include some of the stuff that I've been working on, but these are I think are the highlights for sort of planning related things.
Great.
Any questions?
Both the police department and the rescue building, we'd want to include in the services and facilities, clearly part of the comprehensive plan. The fire protection cisterns, it's something I'm, not only as a planning board member interested in, but as a resident as well. We push that out into Wissahickon Point because there's no municipal water out there, and we're hoping that that's going to move forward. The accessory dwellings, interestingly enough, was our representatives, June Speakman's baby. I was just reading in the Wall Street Journal that when they did this in Los Angeles, there were 7,000 applications for accessory dwellings and only 1,000 applications for regular building. And that could be a true nightmare in an area like Rhode Island that is so densely populated, and particularly in Warren. So it's an issue. Those bills were a matter of concern to the board, and certainly to me in terms of the board, in terms of what defines affordable, how much more streamlined do you make the comprehensive permit process. So clearly, staying on top of the bills that did pass are going to be very important to us, because we've learned that we have some leverage over those things, but it sounded like we were going to lose some of that leverage with these bills in terms of trying to streamline the process.
Sure. A good example, like to me, the best example is the bill that passed. That's if there's an adaptive reuse of a commercial building into residential, that is now a permitted use by right. So technically, if you think of big commercial building out there, if they're converting it to housing, and I don't know if there has to be an affordable component to it, but certainly if there is an affordable component, it can bypass this group. It's between me and Matt. So, I mean, there would be probably your technical advisory committee review process, but that's a good example of what could be a big project that is certainly streamlined and intended to be a good thing, but may not be necessarily a good thing as something comes in. Because sometimes there are projects that warrant a review by 5, 7, 9 people rather than just an administrative officer.
It sounded as though there would at least be a TRC
Right.
established with those, so that's that gives us some wiggle room, but
Right,
not
and
all
that's
of
in
it.
our current regs anyways,
Right.
but yeah, I find it, that's a big one to me, to think that the extent of that kind of a project could be considered a permitted use by right.
Any other questions or concerns? That was excellent. Thanks, Herb. That's
Sure.
that keeps. I mean, we do want to know that stuff. I mean, clearly the 3 grants are important to the very information we're discussing today. In
Yep.
terms of the services and facilities.
And
The
obviously-
the CLG.
Yep.
Certified local government. An inventory is something that I've encouraged the historic preservation groups in Warren to do to avoid what happened on 119
Okay.
Water Street. Whether they're going to do that or not, I don't know. But so if we can get this money and do it.
That's a perfect example of the type of application that they would fund. I mean, it's a competitive grant program, so it's obviously a function of the federal monies that are available administered through the state. But that's a classic example of the type of use of those particular funds. If there's been one that's done in the past, the idea would be, or the ideal would be to take that, update it, so you're not recreating the wheel. But yeah, those are the things, or you pick a certain sector that you may be focused on, and you could create regs, you can do further analysis, you can have certified historic folks come in and do the surveys as a, for instance, rather than it just being, say, a volunteer or local group. So there are many benefits to that particular program that I think would benefit not only the volunteer group, but also to help add a level of professionalism into that historicness.
Great. That would be a huge, it could have frankly potentially avoided what happened with 119, because it would have been, these places would have been surfaced and looked at prior to the wrecking ball, showing up on the street.
So if there is, I sort of took the ball this time and threw it to see if this is the kind of planning director's report that'd be helpful for you. But I'm open to suggestions. I take no pride of authorship and things. So if there's something that you would prefer to have or see or hear, just let me know in the interim. It's usually the type of thing that I'll sit down a couple days before the meeting and try to draft up, just so I have the notes to myself. If you want to get it more formalized, just let me know so that I can then prepare it for a packet. Like today, I just sat down and drafted it. So yeah.
I think when we've got something where there's the potential for something to come in, for example, there's a proposal that we've heard vaguely about for 40-unit development off Child Street. That, there was discussion, it actually was through the Warren Times Gazette, not through any presentation to us. So, but it is something that we'd be very interested in knowing if you're hearing something more officially before it comes out, on that one. Liberty Street School, we had the TRC, they're going to come back for yet another take on that. But, I was working with Allison on that, and that's stalled.
Yeah, I just got my request today for the third TRC, so I'll be in the middle of trying to schedule that in the next couple of days.
And the challenge there to me is really on that one is going to be making sure that these folks have their ducks in a row, because to have 3 TRCs, I mean, it's been a very good collaborative effort, but 3 TRCs is one too many, and, in terms of how this thing could go. And they're well-meaning, they're nice people, it's not like they're trying to put one over on us, but that definitely needs to be addressed, because it's just gone on too long for everybody's taste.
Sure.
Great. Well, yeah, let's chat about what could be in a packet. But ideally it's like informal is much better.
Sure, that's great. Yeah, and I do, for all members that I haven't really chatted with, I do have an open door policy. So if you are walking by someday and you have an idea or whatever, just stop in and I'll let you know if I have a meeting. But for the most part, I'm happy to entertain whatever thoughts are on your minds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, approval of minutes. We were sent those. Any responses to that? One of the things that I'd recommend is instead of a narrative, bullet points. It'll make it easier, I think, for you as well as for the board members. Just if there's an action that we're proposing, I just think, if it's bulleted rather than, and then somebody said something rather than, a dialogue, it's easier and faster for all of us to zero in on it. Yet there was one thing in there, but again, it's not, they're not intended, they don't have the power of a legal document, which I learned to my distress many years ago on a decision that we made. And I said, well, it's in the minutes. What doesn't matter, unless it's in the decision, it doesn't have the power of law. But that said, it's important for us to be as transparent as possible And for somebody to look at it and say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't understand what went on there, because there are some commissions and boards in this town that operate under a veil of secrecy, and you don't find out anything until it happens, as opposed to, I want to make sure that what goes on in here is absolutely clear to the people that we're supposed to be serving. So anything else on the minutes?
No, I mean, I'm just trying to see if is this a different format than the ones that we received previously? Is that why you pointed that out, or did?
Yeah, well, we've
So like if I look for April, the April minutes. Seems like this is pretty similar.
yeah, they are. Again, it's the more clarity we can bring to it, the better. And that's why I think, bullet points can be, and it's easier.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to sit down with Haley and just go over things and see if there's a way to either improve or make sure that we're
Yeah, no,
as
I mean,
clear as possible.
really good. No criticism intended. We've had some issues in the past with,
Mhm.
previous secretaries that have been, where we've had to spend a lot of time on this. We don't have to spend time on it, but I think, so anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the bullet point ideas, I agree with I like bullet points. I use them often if I can. I think we did speak before about how, the minutes are not supposed to be a verbatim transcription of every conversation, because that would be just too difficult for you anyway. But certainly you want to capture the substance of conversation. I don't think I would change anything about the substance necessarily, but the
No.
visual, by bullet pointing like certain things, it could just make it easier to read where we have like dense paragraphs. That's all. Otherwise, very good job.
Great. Motion, I'll make a motion to approve.
Yes, second.
Second, Brett, all in favor? Aye, those opposed? Okay, our election of officers has dragged about in the hopes that we would have everybody showing up, but that didn't happen, so. Mike, did you have a?
So I move that Fred Massey be the chairman of the planning board.
I'd
And
like to nominate Brett as the chairman of the planning board.
All right. Thanks, Ashley. I guess that means I won't vote. I'll abstain.
no, I think you do vote.
Is that the only position?
No, there's a vice chair.
Okay.
Well, do we do the vote first on the one person, on me, and then go to the second person, or, if there's probably.
Is a motion, yeah, seconded, so you take a vote.
Yeah, I would suggest that you dispense with the chair role first, and then whomever becomes chair, then they continue on with the
With the
with
vice
vice chair. From that standpoint, you have two nominations before you. There are different ways to deal with that, should you choose to, one of which is by, secret ballot or what have you. Call of the division, if that's the right terminology, but should see if both who are nominated wish to serve in the particular role, and then go from there.
I'll say that I am grateful for your nomination, and that means a lot to me. I don't think that I'm in a position with my time to serve as chair. So I want to be able to give the board my full, attention, maybe someday. I'm happy to serve as vice chair if the board wants to consider me, and if Ashley wants to nominate me for vice chair, I'm happy to do that. I think I can rise to that.
Okay, so you're withdrawing here.
Well, I can't accept the nomination for
Yeah.
chair.
Okay.
Right.
So the just a show of hands for chairman. That would be me. Those in favor? Okay, and Ashley, did you want to nominate a vice chair?
Yes,
Brett as vice chair? Or,
yes.
I know that Mike had indicated an interest in
Yes.
doing that as well. I don't know where we take it from there.
Take nominations for,
Yeah. Again, I nominated Mike, and Ashley nominated Brett.
Okay.
So those in favor of, we'll do Mike first, or Mike as vice chair. Okay, Brett as vice chair. Okay, so welcome to the.
All right. Glad to meet you, Captain. Thanks a lot.
Okay. We're going to, the review and discussion of draft material for the comprehensive plan, the economic development and facilities and services. I'd like to do the facilities and services first, if we could. If you've had a chance to look at these, you may have noticed that there is some blue and red in there. There have been some changes made to it. We can deal with these as we have before in a general sense. Is there anything in the goals that people feel need to be changed?
Brad, I'll just mention, it's been, the facilities and services element was drafted over a year ago, the original one that you looked at, so time has passed and maybe there certainly has been some updates and some additional content that we included here that's shown in the track changes. But just to explain the facilities and services goals, the state requirements, that's what I outlined here, energy goal, water supply goal, because that was, the requirement was to have a goal for each of those specific topics within the
Right.
facility. And other elements, you don't necessarily see that where it's broken out like that, but I just want to make sure we met those requirements. We can eliminate that stormwater, the heading there for each of those, but I just want to make sure we include a goal for each of those as that's part of the requirements.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, they all connect well with the policies that follow, so I didn't see any overarching issues. As you know, I've if we go, so moving along into policies and implementation actions.
I don't think, yeah, so there were no changes here.
I did think that this may be a place where we would, or not, it is introduced later, but the wastewater management district in the third policy down, it says in areas without public wastewater treatment systems, ensure that wastewater is properly managed to protect and enhance water resources. Implement regulations which will require phase out of septic systems which do not meet current standards for on-site treatment and explore funding opportunities to assist homeowners. The town does have a wastewater management district, so my understanding is that those regulations are in place for the septic systems, which also follow the Department of Environmental Management regulations.
DEM, yeah.
So implement suggests
It's
that
not
we
there.
have to create
Yeah.
it, but it's already there. So we might want to say enforce the regulations, because I think that when Bob was here, he was working with our septic hauler guy. Do you know the name of the fellow who does or the company? Yeah, the septic tanker that comes and he lives on Barton Avenue. Anyway, the guy who does the pump outs, each area that has septic can have 2 pump outs. as per the town. That was necessary when there were a lot of cesspools. Now that most of the cesspools, due to this cesspool act that passed the Rhode Island General Assembly eons ago, has finally come into being, and has the force of law. He doesn't need to go out that often. People can call him twice, but he's the inspector. That's my understanding for the wastewater management district. So he'll go to some place if he's asked to pump out a septic system and then assess whether or not that's a septic or a cesspool. And he was supposed to have a listing of all of these things. I don't know where that is now, and that's something we need to take a look at, because the last time I checked, he was 5 years out on, what those things are, and they're incredibly important, particularly in areas that are serviced by wells. Because if you've got a cesspool, I think we did a pretty good job of locating where these were, and I think most of the folks, like in my neck of the woods, have replaced them, but even one could be poisonous if it's allowed to go. So in terms of enforcing that, I think there's two things. One is for the comprehensive plan. The other, Herb, is for you to, if you could, put your hands on the structure of that wastewater management district, because I think Bob. Well,
That sounds really funny.
oh, what? This,
Put your hands on.
well, wear some gloves for God's sake. Particularly when you're shaking hands with that guy.
So we'll update that action item, update it based on the current status, like maybe there's an inventory that exists of
There is an
existing, the
inventory,
remaining
And we want to make sure that
cesspools
it's,
and come up with an action item that helps follow through with continuing to update those.
right. So I would call that short-term ongoing as opposed
Yep.
to medium-term. And then the exploring funding opportunities, the Rhode Island, the revolving fund
Mhm.
has money that is no interest loans that's available for septic replacement. There was a period of time when the town had grants, but
Yeah,
I think those have gone down the toilet.
Yeah, I'm not sure that DEM has that for individuals anymore. But yeah. But the link to all of this, of course, is in the sale of property. As soon as there's a sale of property, there's a trigger that the new home buyer is responsible for getting rid of the cesspool within 2 years, I think is the thing. So there may be, as you say, there may already be a good form of catch up that's occurred. But I'll see what I can find out there, and I'll work with Alice on whatever language. we
The
need.
coastal folks had to, even if you didn't sell it, you had to put it out. And if you were within 50 feet or 100 feet of the wellhead, you had to replace it.
Yeah,
You
there's a
didn't
couple
wait for the kind of
Yeah.
Massachusetts thing.
Mhm.
Okay, and then,
actually, well, the following one, can we talk about acquire property for the construction of a new rescue station headquarters?
yeah, so that's where is this new rescue station? Do you know where
I don't know.
have they talked about that or?
So the $2 million.
Right.
Yeah, I have a meeting with the fire chief. It's either tomorrow or the next day about this, and I know that they've got a host of information to share with me. So I just can't answer the question right now.
Yeah, no problem. But the 2 million, is it for building or property acquisition? Do you know that?
If I understand, it's building the
Yeah.
way it's termed.
So I'm thinking they might have a location already in mind or something, so we'd want to
So
put that
it-
in, Allison.
just, yeah, what's in the current draft, the town has secured funding and is in the early stages of planning a new rescue station headquarters that could serve as a testing and training site. So that's still, I guess, accurate at this point, but we could add in maybe we expand upon that action item a little bit,
Yeah,
as far as more than just acquire the property, but actually
well,
the
I'd
design of
I put
it.
in the $2 million, the
Yeah.
actual dollar figure.
Yeah, because it's an earmark, there technically isn't an application to be made, but
Mhm.
because it has to pass through a federal agency, an application has to be made. So what's going to happen is USDA is going to craft or tailor an application for each of the 3 earmarks, including this one, to go through. So we're at the stage where we're putting together the information, starting to put together the information that USDA is going to need to tailor that application for us. Then we'll put the application in and proceed from there in terms of the implementation, whether that's, and again, I apologize, I don't know the answer to your question, but whether that's toward acquisition or building or both, I can work with Allison in the next week or so to figure that out.
Great, yeah, so we'll just want to,
Yeah, so
Is-
we'll expand upon that action item. Yep.
Is 2 million enough?
It's never enough.
Right,
But,
that doesn't seem like enough to me.
That's,
And so is there something to fill that gap? I mean,
right. So there's probably, if there isn't, there's probably a level of capital project funds that have been raised that are sitting in an account, a fund balance account sort of thing. But I'll have to, again, that's part, I'm just starting to get caught up in this, just had the meeting to know what the amount is. We'll meet with the fire chief later this week to see if there is bridge funding that we need or if it exists, that sort of thing. A good question.
oh, okay, yeah. Oh,
Thanks,
great.
Haley. Yep.
Yeah.
So,
that makes-
so this next item is of concern to me. It says secure funding to provide potable water to Tuissa. Do we really want to commit to that in the comp plan?
No, in fact, my neighbors will kill me for that, but frankly, there's no, this is a $20 million plus project to bring water out to Tuissa, whether it's across the under the Kickamulet or down Tuissa Road. So it's unrealistic to assume that the town is somehow going to find that kind of money when there is an existing water source there that is functioning. The Tuissa Point Water Trust runs a water trust, and the rest of the folks have wells. So I agree, Mike. I think that we need to ensure Tuissa maintains potable water would be better, because otherwise, in the case like that, then the water trust could come to the town or through the town grant funding for it. For example, I've got a $200,000 grant to the revolving fund right now out of the water trust through the Department of Health for individual water monitors in all of the houses to help control, better pinpoint flow and problems. But I think that the town needs to play a role in that. I'm a volunteer and I'm doing all this. I mean, the town, Bristol County Water is separate from the town. So I don't want the town to start getting into the water business. I'd rather put it in the form of, assistance with grants or grant writing.
So maybe is there an additional one that you'd like to see in here as an implementation action? Is that the town ought to establish a new or a better partnership with the water authority with regard to the provision of?
No, but they're not going to provide water out there either.
No, but what we're looking for is what's gonna, if you look at the second one
Enacted moratorium.
is enacted, which is, before you do that, you got to understand why you'd be doing it. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best.
Yeah, severely strained public safety at risk. I mean, how are we gonna, that requires.
Well, I'll give you a background on this briefly. There's a study done that indicated that the maximum amount of water that can be taken out of there is 16,000 gallons a day. There are times when we hit 14,000 gallons a day during the summer. It's two very shallow 40-foot wells. If it goes beyond that, there's a possibility of saltwater intrusion, and with that, the potential of chemical contamination. I mean, there's no
Yeah.
harsh chemicals out there, but the possibility of that water source being polluted. That area supplies enough tax revenue so that if it died, the town would go bankrupt. So, which was, something I talked to Bob about before. So it's in the town's best interest to make sure that attention is paid to it. Every house that goes down, one house that had one bathroom was taken down. The new house has 5 bathrooms. That was the concept, I think behind Bob putting in the moratorium.
Right.
It's not like you're trying to stop people from building. You're trying to keep it within proportion, within the existing resources that can feed that.
And sure, and what else can we do other than moratorium on building to reduce demand? If it's reaching those heights in the
I mean,
summer.
I think you could do like zoning, like when we've talked to the zoning board, they said, hey, that's not our issue.
Hmm.
They said, like somebody's building a huge house on a tiny piece of property. And went to the zoning board, as did neighbors, and said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, that's not our issue. It's not my job, not.
But it is the zoning board, if it's, shouldn't that area be zoned for so many, just like?
It's a
anything else?
village overlay. It's all non-conforming lots.
Oh, really?
So it's a confusing kind of a situation.
So is
I
it,
thought
is
this
it
is
the
an
issue of the
issue.
existing regs need to be modified to restrict the scale of the development? Or is it that applicants are seeking relief from the regs and getting it?
They're
Or,
both.
yeah,
One is that the regs need to be tightened so that it's understood that when you're talking about a building, even the one that fits within a footprint, if you build,
Yeah.
if there's a 1-story building and you build a 3-story building on top of it, and that has the potential for having 12 people in it instead of 2, that's one of the problems. And the other problem is that if they come and ask for zoning variance relief, that shouldn't happen. I mean, it's an area where when you start talking about variances, it doesn't make any sense because you've already got non-conforming lots that are way below what standard is. So that's the concept. I
Yeah.
don't agree with the 12-month moratorium.
Sure, and I think, there's other ways to explore water use in general too, right? Like, when we look at our water bill, you can use just about as much water as you want. Your bill's not gonna go up. You pay for your meter, you pay some basic rates, and then short of running a 1,000 or 2,000 gallons of water, the difference is like pennies. If Bristol County water was, this goes to Bristol County water, but not where the well is, but just generally speaking, right, in water usage. If you're billing based on usage, people are gonna use less.
We can't, as a community,
Right.
we only bill a straight fee. So the reason that we're looking for the monitors is twofold. One is so that when there's a leak, for example, if there's a toilet that is flowing, it's 5,000 gallons an hour. Over the course of the day, that's 25,000, it's 2,500 gallons of water. That's, and we've had more. So let's call it 3,000 gallons. Right now, we're running at 9,000 gallons. That's a third of the daily demand because some numbskull left.
Well, is there an ability to see where the use is like, that's what I'm asking, like, other than not building something, how do you reduce the current usage, right? Is there a way to see where these leaks are happening?
No, that's why we need the monitors. Because we're all we've got now are 2 sides. One's got 46 houses on it, one's got 20, or somewhere in that range.
You can invoke fines and whatnot, right?
No, you can't. As a water trust, we're not like the Bristol County Water Authority. We can't charge people for overuse. It's a very slippery slope. It's an unusual situation, incredibly unusual situation. It does exist in other parts of the state. We work with the Rhode Island Rural Water Association on this, But anyway, I don't want to take up too much time. on
Yeah,
this. So I think,
But what the municipal, so what's the municipal role gonna be here to help with
yeah,
this
that's what
situation?
we're looking
Right.
for is what's the municipal connection to this?
I mean, it can't be, I mean, take it to its absurd, result. Like, everybody just ran the water. You mean to say the town couldn't do anything about it? And
No.
then that can't be the case.
No, it is. If we had a leak that was in the system that we couldn't find and it went, 17,000 gallons for a month and freaking out.
Okay, so that needs to be addressed.
So with new development. I don't know anything about wells. Can you dig another well? For a different development?
Is it well?
Like, don't individual homes have their own wells?
No,
Not there, but like in gen-
hundred
in-
of the
in-
100 houses for round figures on that, on that point. 20 of them have private wells. The rest are on this community system. As soon as you come off the point, it's a geographic
Mhm.
location. It's a different story.
Yeah, how do they, because they're,
They've got 80-foot wells. Everybody in the
they
immediate
don't.
point has 40-foot wells. They're all really shallow. And so as a consequence, in fact, that's what stimulated the wastewater management district in the first place. Because one of the neighbors was shoveling his overflow from his cesspool into his neighbor's yard, and he came to me and I went to DEM and, that started the wastewater management district for the entire town, because this is the problem. You're poisoning your own well with stuff. So it's a Department of Health, not a town regulation, but the town at the very least needs to be aware of it. Things like, what do you use on the road? Salts and stuff like that.
Mhm.
No fertilizers, that these things are potential contaminants that could.
Or no watering your lawns and all that.
Yeah, no, we do that, we encourage people, but there's no stick. It's just, eloquence and a carrot.
instead of a moratorium, it would be you can't hook up any more homes to that well.
That we're doing.
Yes,
But
like stop
if you
that.
take, like, right now, there's a house that's going down, nobody's been in it for 30 years. And they're building a house with 6 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. So all of a sudden, that's gonna draw.
So theoretically, can each house have their own well?
They could, but most of them don't have the space, because if you have a septic system, because there's no sewer, your proximity to your well has to be a certain distance. Most of the places.
So I feel like that's a solution. Instead of a 12-month moratorium on all building, it could be on buildings that need to tap into this system. So if you were going to build, you would need to have, the developer would need to have properties large enough to accommodate their own well and the septic system.
Or maintain within a reasonable size.
Yeah.
It's
It's a
complicated.
sneaky-
and that's
But yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's.
But it puts the burden of the systems on the individual property owner rather than on an association. From that standpoint, and the RDM, RIDEM's rules are going to apply. And if you can't meet the 50-foot setback or whatever it is from that standpoint, from the wellhead, then you're not going to get an
Yeah.
approval. But there are also, there's, technologies nowadays that allow you to do certain things. So, but I get, so I'm so out in your area, it's a private water association, essentially, like a
Yeah.
501c3.
Yeah.
So my guess is that you can probably amend your bylaws and such where you could get away from, say, a flat fee and go into a flat fee and a user fee based thing, and the association votes to put meters on each of their wells, so that at least you're gaining revenue to offset the cost of, say, any improvements or things that you may need to do to
Well,
your
the
system.
problem though is the resource volume
Yeah.
is such that, it's not a matter of just charging people for overage, it's reaching a certain plateau.
No, I
and-
get that, but it could be also helping to pay for, any studies or whatever to update, or, I mean, I'm not trying to argue,
Yeah,
I'm just
no,
sort of trying to
I agree.
think of things to deal with that, because I think Allison's question is key, is that the town could say, well, they're their own association, hands off.
Well, that's what they've done
Right, and
today.
if there's something that the town should be involved with, to be respective, it's the association that should be approaching the town to say, what is it, what are you looking for from the town in order to help you out?
Well,
If there's help to be given.
right, and in a comprehensive plan, I don't want to get into the detail, although, really good point. That's when we'll work on the wells, but also, if you take a small house that's already on the system and then they build a bigger
Yeah,
house,
it's-
you're kind of out of luck.
Right, it's the
because
regular, the side of it to me is to say, what is it that you need the regulations, the zoning and the subdivision to say in order to help in protecting.
So
that?
why don't we, in this, for an action step, we would say, work on a plan with the town to assist the Tewissip Point Water Trust in maintaining the integrity of the system.
I would even like to broaden it because I know there's other developments that are happening there. And so typically a developer is going to buy a larger parcel and build multiple homes. And so if that developer does that, then we probably want to know how many homes each well can accommodate. So if this developer does decide to build 20 homes, they have the capacity, and then there's some type of understanding of what, and that's how you regulate it, because it would just be like when we're looking at any other plan that comes across, it's, we say, does the town have enough sewer or water to accommodate? And there was one rejected a couple of years ago because it didn't have enough sewer and water capacity. And so what's the difference if the sewer water capacity comes from the Bristol County water, or if the sewer water capacity is coming by a town regulation because that area of the town doesn't have Bristol County water? And so
I mean, there are, in other parts of the town, the well issue is not as vital because the salt water, you don't have that saltwater intrusion as soon as you get off. So there's always, it seems like there's always a possibility around here of getting water out of the well. But what I would say, instead of these two top things, would be a cooperative effort, that moves forward, and we could even call it medium term, because I think it's going to take more than us trying. I mean, I'd like us to think about it at some point. It consumes me. I'm chairman of the Water Trust, and it consumes as soon as people understand what it means. They realize that we're dealing with a somewhat fragile situation here, vulnerable.
You'd make that a Pri 1, right?
Yeah, I would, because I think
it's pretty-
it's happening now. I mean, since I've been there for 35 years, and when I first moved in, it was a bunch of summer cottages that people winterized, and now it's $1 million, $2 million houses that are going in. And those bring along with them, much larger internal infrastructures that could demand a lot more water.
well, it sounds like you have an association that you could expand, and that's how you can control it, because if you have an association, then there's a chair, you have to go, like, if you own a condo associate, if you're in a condo, you can't do anything to your condo unless you go to the association and get permission.
Yeah,
So you could always
unfortunately,
formulate-
this doesn't, we don't have that legal power, and that's why I'm thinking the town could, help. I mean, that's one of the reasons why that fire protection, those cisterns, because they can't use that to fight fires, and there's fire out there could have taken out all the houses if the wind had been blowing the way it usually does.
There is something on the town, because when my plan was developed, they developed it into which we have a homeowners association
Mhm.
because of our stormwater basin.
Right.
But that actually encompasses everything if we really wanted to enforce it, including fences, sheds, and everything within there because of how it was written. And we were built between, mine was one of the last ones built at like
Yeah,
2016. So there's got to be some provision in the town that's already there that allows that to happen.
Yeah, what you're getting at is articles of association beyond a water association. So, a condo association where the group gets together and says, this is what we're going to do, and you create
But-
your own bylaws, but the town.
But apparently the town forced the developer to do that.
Yeah.
To get the,
Yeah, they
Yeah,
did that.
you know what I mean?
That's like a-
To get- yeah.
Brilliant that they've
Yeah,
done
that
that.
happens all the time with new
Yeah.
developments. You force the issue. So as, for instance, you give them a stormwater or whatever the case may
Right.
be. In this particular case, there's not like a development application before you where you can require that sort of thing from occurring. This is an existing situation. The town, I mean, what I think the consolation is that what the the water association should be doing is saying, here's the report that says this is what the limitations are from that standpoint. We need to kind of match the town's land use regulations so that we protect this limited resource.
Sounds like a objective to me.
Great.
Well, Fred, this issue of some sort of thing that triggers a moratorium, do you think that's a good idea?
No, I think that both of those need to go away because it's putting the cart before the horse. I think that there needs to be more discussion with the town, and that's what I'm saying. I think that the actions that would be better and less inflammatory. I mean, as soon as you say 12-month moratorium, people freak out,
Well, it's not just that, like, what do you do once the 12 months is up? You haven't fixed the problem.
Right, yeah,
Like,
well,
Well,
the idea
it's
was,
to give you time to craft those regulations.
Right.
um,
Sure, but
To
But
start.
I feel like you don't even start worrying about it until you invoke the moratorium. Like, this all has to get figured out way before a moratorium should ever have to be issued.
well, Bob actually had suggested the moratorium because, as Allison was saying, what it does is it puts things on hold. Because there was, a kind of snowball effect. You've got somebody buys a house, builds a bigger one, somebody down the street says, I can get a ton of money for my land. They sell their house, another big one goes up, and
Right, but it's still all dependent on this triggering clause. If it becomes severely strained and public safety is at issue. So, look, we don't know when that would happen. Like, when does it become severely strained? When is public safety at risk?
I think, again, it speaks to what Herb said. I've got the study that was done by Northeast Water Solutions. It manages for us.
It's
And
what we're all talking about in the moratorium is it's enabling legislation that says that a community can take a portion of time to put things on hold so that they can craft the regulations that they want for whatever the particular area or issue is that they want to deal with. So it buys them a little bit of time. The question, that I get what Brett is talking about is, when and if do you start that sort of thing?
Right.
Because moratoriums are rooted more in philosophy than that. So even though the statute enables you to do something like that, you still have to ask your question, is this what we really want to do? Because you are, touching base on private property rights and that sort of stuff. That's where taking.
Well, but could we essentially craft some language that said that this has to be carefully monitored out there?
But that,
or
to
something like
me,
that.
that's really a function of the water association that's out there.
Well, I'm just not talking about the people who are on the association. I'm talking everybody else out there is on wells.
Sure.
And they're in jeopardy too.
Right.
And as more houses get built, the existing wells, never mind the water.
which all draw from the same.
And that's right.
Yeah,
And
and I'm
that's where
saying,
we're right at.
it's a larger problem and something that said, at least we're gonna keep track of this and at the appropriate time, take whatever action is needed, something like that.
Right. No, and I understand that. And when you carry it that little step further to say moratorium,
Well, I know
is it
that's a
the
loaded
smaller
word.
area? Is it larger? Where do you draw your geographic?
So
line?
not only that, but I don't mean to, maybe I'm not being clear.
No, you're right.
I just think by putting too much of our hope in some future date moratorium isn't going, that means we walk away and we just kick the can down the road. Based on what you just said, we need to take other action steps like now,
Yeah.
way before we have to invoke a moratorium.
Right.
So this all needs to get fixed now without a moratorium. That's my point. And a moratorium hopefully doesn't ever have to be necessary because we've solved the issues. So I feel like a moratorium is like a last ditch effort to fix this. But again, that wouldn't even start until basically there's a disaster at bay. So I don't see
Well,
how it helps.
I don't see this wouldn't, again, I think we can take moratorium out.
It
because
seems
I
like,
think-
yeah, there's consensus
I think the
that
language
nobody
is
wants
too
that language in here, so
inflammatory.
we'll
And it's
eliminate that.
also, this is, the point here is the town recognizes that there's an issue. That the zoning board doesn't get away with saying, that's not our concern, because it is the town's
So
concern. If that's where I think the regulations need to reflect a concurrence with the water trust so that it's understood that if a building is proposed for an area like that, that it needs to be within, it doesn't increase the draw significantly.
Like,
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that those are the sorts of things that we build in.
Yeah,
can't we just put that
To
the
the
zoning is
language.
updated?
so are you okay with that? Allison?
Yeah.
I think I can craft some language
Okay.
based on this discussion. It seems like everyone's in consensus really.
Yeah.
you
No,
know,
definitely.
About what
It's a-
needs to be in here,
It's
but
focus on bylaws.
yeah.
And we can have some more discussion. I mean, I've talked, there are a bunch of Byzantine issues there in terms of interactions with the community club, and I'll tell you,
Yeah, yeah.
it's,
Just so that I'm following correctly, that therefore the implementation action will be creation of some sort of plan to address this?
yeah,
Because it seems like that's what
Yeah.
Brett's getting after, is like, I don't know, some sort of.
yeah, because
near-term,
we're not gonna
midterm-
do it here. in
Right,
this-
yeah, yeah.
Tonight,
But it just identifies there's a
In this body, it's
Yeah.
too much,
need for a plan, yeah.
I
yeah,
think, yeah, the town
response
and
plan
the private water
I-
trust
a response plan.
collaborating
yeah.
together.
With like probably some sort of time horizon.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a commission needs to start like right away, to go and advise the town council. I mean, there's a lot of.
Well, again, I think I'll wait for Herb to get his feet a little bit wetter.
I've already been flushed down the toilet earlier.
And your hand on the thing.
Yeah.
Just one other question, this may be a, down in the weeds, but in the verbiage that supports this, water supply section, I wonder if,
Where are you, the goals?
no, under the water supply section that supports this.
All the narrative about this issue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just wonder about your point about the economic impact of if this does not get worked out to the town, like the imperative to maintain the tax base in Tuisset. I don't know if that's worthwhile to like put in there, but it seems like, because otherwise people could just be like, whatever, I don't live in Tuisset, I don't give a damn kind of thing. Whereas if there's some sort of note of like, and this is a key economic region for the tax base, I don't know, maybe
I
that's.
agree. No, I think that that's important because that does tend to be, unless you say you're gonna be hurt severely in your pocketbook, even though you don't live in Tuisset, as a town councilor, you're gonna be paying attention.
Yeah.
To the
Agreed.
fact that the tax base out there is a huge chunk of what is the total tax base for the town. So, yeah, I agree. I think we should
okay.
put that in. I mean, I think there's even figures available for that in terms of, what that represents. And I think it was, in the millions of dollars for sure. Thank you for your time on that. I appreciate it. It seems like it's an individual issue, but there's also another part of Tuisset too, where they built houses outside and they're above these other houses down near the water, and they are the ones down near the water fought this development for a long time. They lost, and now they're running out of water in the summer. And they're also very, high tax base houses down there. So we have an issue with water in this town outside of the areas that are not served. Serpentine Road too is another area that is not serviced by the Bristol County Water Authority, relies on wells and septic. But thanks. There was under the carrying on with the efficient and environmentally sustainable solid waste management program, reduce financial and environmental costs. There was in the narrative a discussion of the fact that trash and recycling have gone in the reverse direction after COVID.
Yeah, that's common around the whole.
I mean, when they first started the trash and recycling, I thought that they were going to be monitoring those. And I can't tell you how many blue bins I see with trash in them and trash bins with recyclable material sticking out of them. And I thought that that was supposed to be something that the town was monitoring. In other words, if you put cardboard and glass bottles in your trash, you don't get it picked up.
How do they monitor it? But unless
Just
you
look at it.
open, Well, who's gonna walk around and open the,
Not every pickup, but could some kind of monitoring take place? Because it
Is
looks
it-
like we're really,
do you have where it has to be both out? Your recycling bin has to be out in order for trash to get picked up. Is that current a policy?
They only come every other week. The recycling only comes every other week,
Right.
and so then your recycling bin is overflowing.
yeah.
And I mean, if we're encouraging recycling, you would think that you'd do the opposite.
I've got
Because
more-
my recycling bin is overflowing, it's like
Yeah, no, I've
literally
got more
overflowing.
If you recycle properly, your blue bins should be full
Right.
faster than your garbage.
Mine is
That's-
way max,
Yeah.
and so then like,
I have 1 bag or 2 bags and then.
And the trash, yeah, huge barrel.
So that's right.
So, but the unfortunate thing is that it doesn't all get recycled essentially when it gets to the state. Essentially,
Well, that's, yeah.
it's,
I will say I've noticed before, like if I have, I'm thinking of one of my neighbors who I think does some creative recycling. And I generally see those items that are wishfully recycled remaining there after, like when they put a lamp in there or something, I'm like, that's not recyclable. They pick up the recycling and then, or they might not even pick it up. So I think there is some sort of monitoring happening in that.
They're gonna, the trucks should be self-monitored. Yeah, they should reject something if it's filled with non-recyclable material and, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's a question. I thought at one point there was supposed to be some form of monitoring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason it came up was, A, I've seen it, where big Amazon boxes are sticking out of the black barrel, and B, it's like we're saying that people aren't doing as good a job at separating their stuff. That's what I read there in the narrative.
So
do we want to mention garden waste here too? I mean, essentially we do recycling
Posting,
and composting, but there is the other program by which the city picks up garden waste, and so that doesn't end up in the trash system.
yeah, that's pretty good.
yeah, I use that all the time.
me too.
Yeah, hopefully you do yard waste and then really get into food scraps too. And the previous town, not the previous town I was in, but the one before that, it was a town of only about 5,000 people, and most people went to the transfer station on Saturday. And we started out with 4 bins of, I don't know, about this big bins for food scraps. And within about 3 weeks, we had to have 16 bins a week because of the food scraps that people were doing, and it went to a composting facility. I think it was the one up in Maine, which seems to be failing, but there is another one that's nearby here that Black Earth out of Mass or something like that. But anyway, that's something that can hugely affect your waste stream and reducing.
Well, I mean, it seems like it's it's certainly an important expense for the town. The more we can separate those two things out, the less money the town has to pay, is my understanding, correct?
You ultimately pay for everything.
No,
It's, but yeah, you certainly want it more on the waste side of things so that you encourage people to do the separation. But usually there's tipping, it doesn't matter, there's always a tipping fee for whatever barrel is getting tipped,
Right.
whether it's
So I think
recycling.
Bristol has a commercial composting service
Mhm.
that you can sign up with, and they provide the bin and then they pick it up, and
Mhm.
so the town isn't involved, but still they do compost in Bristol.
that's food scraps, not garden stuff.
A question that I have on this one, and it may just be. Well, my first question is probably residual PTSD from the Water Street, and the percentage of housing and affordable housing. When I read the goal of the state's minimum 35% solid waste recycling rate and minimum 50% solid waste diversion rate. Are there any clubs we're gonna get hit with? Because I open up that resource that's like, showing what the percentages are. The thing called, how is my city or town doing? It's like the resource that you click to, the hyperlink.
Yes. Mhm.
And we're in there, we don't, meet the things, but I guess my question is, is it just a financial incentive that we save money if we recycle more, or is there some sort of bad thing that's gonna happen to us? It doesn't look like many people are actually meeting this.
No, it's a goal, similar to the 10% affordable housing.
But someone,
Yeah. Well, in that
But
case,
doesn't
you're
seem-
subject to comp permit. I mean, in that case, you're subject to comprehensive permits. So
right,
That's,
Okay.
in this case, that there's, not that I'm aware of any,
like a fine or anything like that.
no, it's just that it's a goal to try to reach, and that obviously communities are paying those tipping costs, so there is a financial impact, but not related to the.
I honestly think it's the every other week after your recycling bin gets full. What do? You just give up and like throw it away. Either that or keep like, I've had like boxes of recycling in my garage till the next week because there's nowhere to put it, especially with Amazon. I mean, their boxes are massive.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I like to shop. And so like a couple boxes like it's a big bin, but it fills up quick.
I mean, one of the implementation actions be investigate
Yeah,
recycling being picked up every
Every
week
week.
or.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, why not? I mean, it's always, mine's filling up all the time.
Yeah, mine is.
You said it, I mean, that's,
I have tenants, there's multiple people buying on Amazon. That is a huge part of the problem.
yeah, the cardboard every week.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I've got this huge barrel. It's got 2 small bags of garbage.
Yeah.
And the other one, I'm like jamming it in, I'm folding up boxes, standing on them, you know.
One other question I have, and I don't want to belabor this, but it's unclear to me how much we actually pay as a town, and we're really spending a ton of money on waste disposal and tipping costs. I anecdotally, I know that when my parents, their town went to buying a bag, oh my gosh, they got judicious, and they have different, containers and things like, so as soon as it hits your pocketbook. So like in the implementation actions, it talks about reevaluate unlimited curbside pickup items and drop off, the pay as you throw system. I don't have a sense of whether that's actually something that's necessary. I don't know how much we're spending on it, but a data point of one of that being a really effective way of getting people to really pay attention to what they're throwing away if they're paying for it.
And yeah, that's, if you notice how my city and town is doing, those communities that do have the pay as you throw system would be the ones that have that highest recycling rate. Because
Oh,
like,
if-
like
if
Middletown has had that for a long time. And they've
Mm-hmm.
always had very good recycling rates because of that policy where people are,
Yeah, I mean, you hold
they
people
see the
accountable.
cost.
How does that, yeah.
So I mean, when I lived in North Kingstown have the same, you gotta buy tags for your garbage bags, literally.
Yeah.
Go to the transfer station, you buy, they stick onto the garbage bag, and then you have to get those garbage bags from your house to the transfer station. I mean, this is 2009 and 10. It's not like it was the dark ages, right? And so that does 2 things. It increases recycling and reduces people's waste. They use less and throw away less. And then it creates sort of a little economy. I hired a private person to go and pick up the garbage. So you bag your garbage, you put it in your trash barrel. And I think his name was Manny. He would come by with a pickup truck and he would take my bag. And if you've got your tag on it, he brings it for you to the dump. And I paid him a few bucks a week to do that. And there's people all over town that would do that, right? But nevertheless, you got to buy the tags. And, so I think it does hold people accountable. I would support, investigating that instead of the town doing it for free and people taking advantage of it.
But I feel like our taxes are so high. My taxes are more than the principal of my mortgage right
Okay.
now. You know what I mean? It's like we're already paying for so much.
Yeah, I mean, politically, I could see it. I like the idea.
See people having our heads on a pike.
But I think that's a hard habit to break, once it's in place.
Yeah, sure. I got it.
It's a little bit easier when you've got it going. I think
This is
it's
something,
an excellent idea.
So on
That
the
was
one that
probably-
deals with conservation, we're talking about municipal facilities, But I wonder if there's something we can do for new residential construction that encourages energy conservation.
Residential,
Yeah, new residential.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think I don't know if the technology is there. I mean, can you,
Well, but maybe incentives.
yeah, I mean, you can incentivize solar and other renewables
Yeah.
that, using windows that are high efficiency. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can do. High energy appliances, energy efficient appliances rather. I think there's a lot there.
for all new residential?
Right.
I think new builds already have to
Yeah.
meet those
they do.
requirements by whatever.
Yeah,
Well-
there's certain building codes that you have to meet, and then there are incentives that are out there, and it might be the town just doing a better job of making sure that those incentives are available to say, someone that goes in and gets a permit, maybe there's a pamphlet that says, hey, if you want new windows, here's an incentive program or something like that.
Well, what's interesting is in the historic district, that's at the front of their information. And after the incentives is followed the fact that they have to meet certain standards
Mhm.
of the Historic Preservation Commission. So in the historic district, they've done it, but it's had the opposite effect. People have said, oh, look at all these incentives, I'm gonna do it, but then forget about the fact that they have to talk to the historic district. This doesn't impact at all the concept of new residential. It's just that there has been that sense of, the incentives put out there. for
It's
folks.
just understanding that they're available. Like if you buy
Yeah.
a new washing machine that's a high efficiency, chances are there's a rebate that you can get from the state somewhere. And I mean, the retailer will tell you what that is or factor
Rhode
it
Island,
in.
she's sending me things all the time on dehumidifiers and
Right.
like light bulbs and all kinds of stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, can we put in a note indicating that we should make incentives for energy efficiency to all new residential homes? Again, I think it can go online, kind of like our discussion the other day about, you don't have to create you don't have to have a cop at a red light. You can put a camera.
Right.
I'm sure there's the same program here where someone will come out and do an energy audit for your house.
Yeah.
Even before you build
They
the
do.
house,
There's
they'll
tons
do
of-
it.
It rise.
I mean, I don't know if we have to do that because you have to use Rhode Island Energy, and as soon as you use Rhode Island Energy, you either get emails from them or you get stuff in the mail from them to tell you that there's these things, like you said. I know thermostat was almost free.
So are we good then with service and facilities so far?
Yeah.
And
Is there anything additional that you felt we need to add as far as policies or action items? And I'm just thinking of the earmarks that were mentioned tonight, like the Warren Police Department. So it's a internal reconfiguration. Is that what the funding that was secured to be used for? That's not necessarily mentioned in here. I don't know if it needs to be listed as an action item and how quickly that is.
probably should. I mean, if it's it's a reconfiguration, right? They're not building a new building. They're just kind of
The police is just internal.
inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, yeah, we should have a
Mention that.
policy action that.
Listed as an action item.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere where we should be adding about electric vehicle chargers?
So that came up last month when we were in the, working on the transportation element, so that
Yeah.
was something I was gonna add into that, section. But it
I
could be
could see it
also,
here
it could
too.
be here too, it
Yeah.
could be,
I mean, as you're doing upgrades to different
the
buildings.
associated with like a town facility, right, when they're upgraded.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're upgrading.
Mhm.
Yep,
Then we'll
that's a
look
good
into
idea.
those.
Yep.
Anything else? Move to economic development.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody had anything. This seemed a lot, the one area that I was concerned about.
Sorry, can I ask just one more question, on the last one? When, I know that you were saying this was drafted a year ago. At some point, the pandemic impacts public services and facilities and lessons learned. Probably is less relevant. I don't know if we're there yet, but I don't know. What's my comment? If this is gonna be a long-term document.
Is
maybe
this
that
gonna
gets-
date the document? You're saying like it's not.
Yeah.
It's becoming less relevant than when I started working on the comp plan and Bob had mentioned, having a section on this. I think I feel like a lot of communities are incorporating like pandemic conversations into their hazard mitigation plans and
Okay.
comp plan, but we could maybe reword it, speaking of, it's supposed to be here to help for future, in the case
Got it.
of another pandemic, to
Yeah.
try to explain how the community was involved, what had to occur, what should occur the next time,
Jesus, that's what that is.
so. No, but it's certainly a point that the town can discuss whether or not you feel like it's valuable, should be in here, or if it could be reworded or.
Now you've reframed it, like what is that? Those who don't know history destined to repeat it. So I think keeping it in there is worthy. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and I particularly given the fact that it had a direct impact on, trash and recycling too, I think that's a very real example.
I'm seeing there's no dates, so maybe I can incorporate dates of when the pandemic, I don't know if there's really an end date, but.
Yeah, well, I think that the linking it,
Provide a little more background as to why it's in here and details.
here's my concern, about economic development. It seems from what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, that Water Street Historic District is becoming jammed with restaurants, bars, and parking. And
Letter to the editor.
everything in here is pointing toward, water-based uses and, maintaining a balance. And it feels like that has gotten to the point of a crisis down there. I mean, the residents down there are very concerned about parking. The place is becoming, almost more of an entertainment zone than a mixed use zone. And when I first came here, we had X number of liquor licenses, and now it seems like every time a restaurant comes in, another liquor license is granted. So at what point does economic development destroy a town? At what point do you say you can't have any more of these things? It just doesn't, we don't have the space or the resources or the infrastructure to deal with this.
So
I'd like to see something along those lines in this.
So economic development isn't just about business and about business zones. It's about all the pieces that go into the town that keep the town and the tax base and the residents thriving and making money. And so to your point, I think there's a lot that needs added to this around economic development because it's very rural business centric, where our biggest assets are marine trades and the blue economy, which is a huge piece of Rhode Island's strategic plan, as well as manufacturing, which is another large piece. And so I think we really need to build on the fact that there are some really great employers here and that we do have room for more employers like that to come in. And with the water being here and the availability of our connection to 195, I think there's some opportunities that we should leverage and not just focus on the small restaurants in the town center.
So, jumping off from that, which I agree with that, there are the concerns you just mentioned, Fred, I see that a lot of those concerns are, and, I'll warn everyone with, don't get me started on the parking issue. Like I always have been complaining about the lack of a parking management, a real parking management response to the issues in the last couple of years. But that's the reality, right? We have issues with no parking requirements for restaurants and all this other stuff. And, we're just not taking the steps needed to encourage a walking Water Street. Hey, how about that? Right? Rather than everyone drive their big trucks and cars down there and fight for a parking spot. But I don't know I don't know that we need language, and I'm not suggesting that you suggested this, but when we talk about economic development, I don't know that we need language that is restrictive of a particular area to sort of get ahead of like sort of too much economic development. We do have language here that promotes development in the market Metacom plan and phasing in, more dense use developments. That will offset, we need to make other areas of Warren popular as destinations, and that will take pressure off of the development down on Water Street. And from a simple competitive, marketplace perspective, eventually that area is just going to get capped out. People are going to get sick of going and fighting for parking down there. Businesses aren't going to want to open, and they'll go up there. They will go elsewhere. I went down there to get a burger at Chomp 2 days ago, and I'm fighting in and out of the little parking lot there with other people. It's a pain in the neck. I can already see it. I'm not going to go down there too often, or if I do, I'm going to walk, and I can walk down there, right? So a lot of that is going to play out in the private, marketplace, so to speak. But I do think that to address those concerns, it's not an economic development policy. We need to have a discrete sort of approach to dealing with parking and traffic that is separate and apart from all of these different elements.
Well,
And last,
I
but-
see, I would think that parking, I'm not blaming restaurants for being the sole, fault here. The parking, though, is part of economic development. And as you say, I could see a market correction. I don't go down to Water Street because I don't want to drive down there. And until they build the bridge across the Kickapoo, I'm not taking my bicycle on Child Street anymore. It's a bummer. But the concept of economic development is, I think parking is tied into that. If we, and I don't know where that parking study is at this
So
point.
that, the phase 2 was going to move forward, but I don't know. It was-
Yeah, the last time we talked about it,
Yeah.
Ben said that
A month ago,
study was moving
yeah.
forward. I do see that as part of economic development. If you're coming from another part of the state, you don't live here, you can't walk here, and you know that you can park over on Railroad Avenue or over, near
Yeah.
Franklin Street.
Mhm.
And it's a relatively short walk, a quarter of a mile to your restaurant. You might be inclined to do that, if you know that it's there. So that's part of the economic redevelopment, as I see it.
So that would be one of the things that we want to do. And so you would write within the economic development piece that, Warren, we do want to attract this tourist economy that comes in and they spend money, but you want it to be this walkable place that's promoted, because you don't just want somebody to go park from out of town and eat and then leave. You want them to walk around, because when they walk around, they see a shop and they stop in the shop and buy something. You also want to encourage businesses to work together so that their hours are similar, to increase that people want to walk and or want to bike, because if you know that there's other things going on, you're more likely to say like, oh yeah, let's park here and walk down the street and stop here. But if one's shop is dark and the other one's not, then that's not going to happen, because you're not going to know. But the communities that do really well, and that's why malls took off so well, is because people knew that every store in the mall and every food place in that mall was going to be open from this time to this time, and there would be, they could walk and get everything they needed. And so that's what communities have to recreate to really promote economic development. And I think what Brett said is right. Like, we don't have to say, stop doing this on Water Street, because we don't want the opposite to occur. But there are areas of Main Street that still have a lot of potential, just as Water Street would. That could be an interconnection if we started to really focus on building up the businesses and having more opportunities within that. And then the Metacom corridor. So just having more opportunities and making it easier for people to start and grow businesses in other areas, and incentivizing that helps to offset and creates more of that, live, work, play, walkable area.
I agree. I think that we want to see economic development. There is a limit to the amount of economic development that can take place in any given space. It's like, people saying, well, the population of, I saw in the Warren Harbor Management Plan, well, there's going to be greater and greater demand for mooring spaces in the town. Well, there's only so many spaces you can have for boats. Otherwise, you got a parking lot and you've lost the value of the resource. Same is true of Water Street. You've got a place that is not just restaurants, it's also where people live. And a lot of why it's attractive is because a lot of these folks came in almost like homesteaders and built, restored these houses that were falling down. So to me, the two things are linked, and you want to find some happy medium there where you're able to, maybe it's resident parking stickers, and that drives people, over to the parking spaces that are free, but a little bit farther away.
Yeah, I guess ultimately, I suppose my concern is simply introducing too much like parking and congestion language into this element, because we're already addressing that in other elements. So like, at what point are we just blurring the lines into everything? That's all.
Like I said, it was because there's this one page, I think it's page.
Not that I don't have all those concerns. I just mean like,
No,
you can't say, so like, maybe something, and you also just can't like write in implementation actions that speak to limitations on growth, other than what I think you do is you write goals that say balance the development of tourism with a walkable city conducive to people who want to live, residents, blah, 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 right, things like that.
Yeah, no, I'm not, believe me, I'm not, as soon as you start talking limitations.
That's the opposite of it.
Is there, on page 5, it says, Warren also has a popular and growing food services industry. And Hope in Maine is referenced.
Yeah.
But, that to me is, I don't know if that seems hyper-focused on.
Well, I think we should keep that in there because it does, and that's a huge economic support to Warren. And Hope in Maine is a food manufacturer, so you have these small.
Definitely Hope in Maine.
But like even restaurants, are good people, and it attracts people to the town. And let's think, like, for every restaurant that's there, we're making 1% of the food and beverage tax that we're getting back, and so that's offsetting our tax base. It's just, I think you're thinking that there's really not that many restaurants in Warren if you think about it.
Yeah, but hang on, this is just a quote here. This is under a section of economic statistics. I just see this as like, I don't know, reference language of what's been happening. And I don't know, what concerns you about that?
Well, it's just,
Well-
it's a popular and growing food services industry. Hope in Maine, I get for sure. That helps generate other businesses.
Yeah,
That's economic development. Chomp generates food and the money for the person who owns it.
But not really, because
There's not as much, that's not necessarily economic development.
no, it is.
Classic sense.
yeah, but
No,
wait,
it is.
hold on. I don't understand what
I don't understand why it's there.
Okay.
And without, context. you
So
know.
it's just part, to me, Allison,
Yeah, so we can
Like-
add in more contact, I guess. One of the, so accommodation and food services is one of the top industry sectors in Warren, according to the data. So there's manufacturing, accommodation, food services, healthcare and social services. So it's talking about describing, if you look at the standards,
what's this quote from?
it's Rhode Island Rising. It's, you can see the link at the bottom, the citation.
Oh, okay, I see, yeah.
It's a report from, I think it's Commerce.
So I guess, yeah, I just mean like, to me, this is not a policy, and this is a quote.
from a
about
state,
Warren.
It's, yeah, so.
It's not, I'm not, Fred, I'm not reading this as a policy that we're trying to implement, I guess.
Yeah, well, I don't, it's not, because this isn't created the way the other one was, it's like agricultural actions is on page 3. So to me, 5 and 3 look similar, and I'm just confused. that's
Okay,
all.
yeah.
I don't, I want.
And I'm trying to understand your confusion. that's
Yeah,
all.
this is
Right.
like, it's a rough draft,
Okay.
so this is the first time we've discussed economic.
Yeah, yeah.
development, the elements, so it still needs some work. It's
Yeah, it looks like there's,
basically putting content, just starting to build some content for you to respond to provide more.
the word on the
local
resume.
Will this
input.
ultimately be tabulated like the other ones? That the,
Yes.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
has to be,
everything will
for
end up being
sure.
the same format, but this.
Yeah, I'm just, I mean,
Bizarre.
because the focus here, we look at potential policies, they all make sense to me. You can see, though, that there are things that call for balance, ensure, under potential policy, second page, ensure the development or redevelopment of the Warren River waterfront enhances and does not detract from its character and important economic role as a mixed-use working waterfront. That actually, the working waterfront has shrunk quite a bit since the last comprehensive plan. And there was a time when we had to fight off, one guy wanted to build a restaurant where the Warren Yacht Club is now. He said, well, I bought the building at a great deal and I can't find anybody to move in who would use it for water-based purposes. And they had Three Rivers, a restaurant that wanted to move in. So it's, I mean, my concern here is just ensuring that economic development is done in a way that meets that potential policy. That it does not detract from its character and important economic role as a mixed-use working waterfront,
if you're looking at a potential implementation action to that specific one, that first one, review local regulations and make amendments necessary in order to protect waterfront reliant businesses and land use. Would that be an appropriate action step out of the policy that you just read to
Yeah.
scratch that itch?
Yeah, I mean, it's,
I don't know how you quantify it.
yeah, I mean, this is the thing, it's a little, it's a little hard, and that's why I brought up the liquor license thing. It's, if the town council simply says, well, this is good for business, we'll give you another liquor license, they're not necessarily taking into consideration the mixed use concept. And I think parking as well plays a role in that, in terms of what the place looks like, and how livable it is. And frankly, the attraction of the restaurants is because you're in a nice historic district. So the two things work on each other. I used to work for Save the Bay, and people would say, well, what do we need to save the Bay for? Well, I'll tell you why, because if the Bay wasn't here, most of the people who are living here wouldn't be here. And it's an economic generator.
So that's what you actually write. So exactly what you just said, because that is all economic development. So people are hyper focused on business, that's business development. Economic development is the live, work, play atmosphere
Right.
around it. And so I think that's exactly what you write. It's ensuring that we have a very, that mixed use maintains what people want, and they do. They sit on the water because they want to see the water. So you have to, it's not just about, it's about keeping parks. It's about keeping, it's what brings people in And when a beach brings people in, they spend their money here. And
Well, it
economic
brings
development.
people in, but
you know?
also keeps people here.
Right.
And, you know, and as you had said, you don't want to just bring them in, they do the chewing screw. It's like, that's,
Question, there's language, under the potential implementation actions, it says. Incentivize use of vacant storefronts and disincentives for owners of long-term vacant commercial structures. Question that I have, jumping on what you guys are talking about, is there any language that we could say like? Disincentivize raising of historic structures or disincentivizing turning some sort of working waterfront into like a restaurant or just something that you kind of disincentivize, financial disincentive for, knocking down a historic home and putting up something. Does that get any, like, I'm just trying to figure out a way.
yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, and I don't know if, you know, when Luther Blount bought up a lot of the land and then, you know, gave it to the town, the concept was it would be protected, and then those buildings were bought, or, you know, people had those buildings that, you know, like where Chomp was a boat builder, you know, that building. But there was nothing to stop it. And, you know, at this point, I don't know how much is left. Really. I mean, you got Blount, that's huge. Not only the boat building, but also what used to be the seafood processing plant, you know. But it's really chunked out. I mean, in the last 20 years, it's the working waterfront doesn't have a lot of work going on there relative to the waterfront right now. So this was a good idea and a comprehensive plan before us. And I don't know what you do. I don't know what I don't know if we even have the ability to do it, this incentive, if somebody who wants to.
I think it's incentivize people to use it as a working waterfront because it is not being used as that's probably, that's part of the economic development. So if something is limiting people from using it as a working waterfront, they're not going to put their business there. So I think it's incentivizing businesses outside of restaurants to see Warren as a place that they can set up their business. In
Well,
those
I'll give you an
marine
example.
trades.
There's the wharf, the town wharf. That's a place where people could, you know, if we had a lot of docks out there, people could bring their boats in, they could come up into, you know, bring their boats there. That would be a marine business. It would bring folks into Warren. They could eat here, and then they could also go up to Main Street and, you know, buy some things, or, you know, along Water Street and buy things. But, you know, when Chomp went in, that took up a whole lot of the parking spaces that were used by those people.
So it's actually what you're saying is actually the exact opposite of what you want. You want people, so a working waterfront means that it's not recreational use of boats. It's actually people using it for their businesses.
No, a
so-
marine use, like a marina, is a working waterfront. That's part, I mean, it's
Yeah,
less, it's not
Well,
fishermen,
the-
but
Yeah, when we're talking about working waterfront, typically that term is ensuring that land adjacent to water, that businesses that are dependent upon water are permitted and allowed to go there, and that other types of businesses that aren't water dependent don't take over, or residences don't take over that waterfront. So that water dependent uses businesses don't have a place to go because they can only be
they can only
located
be
at
the water.
along the water.
and so I think that is something that we should prioritize, is encouraging the marine trades in the blue economy to see Warren as a place that's a viable business for them to, viable place for them to run the business. Because I think so, when you look at the data and you see the different, so we know that healthcare often, especially in here with healthcare, I know it's a lot of nursing homes and things like that. And so those are low wage jobs. Food and accommodations are low wage jobs. I would love to see the data on the manufacturing jobs and how that offsets, because I guarantee those jobs are much higher than the median wage of Warren, but these other types of jobs are reducing that. And so getting more manufacturing, marine trades, and those type of businesses within Warren then helps our economy because people are making more and having access to higher paying jobs.
So maybe we could have something that says that we should collaborate with the Rhode Island Marine Trades Association at a Newport.
They used
Yeah,
to be out
I
of Bristol.
mean, and
Just-
I,
Certainly thought
They
that's
used to
right.
be,
Yeah, I mean,
they used to be out of Bristol. They just
we're
moved.
trying to get, it's a tough balance because a restaurant is gonna make you much more money, much quicker than a marina, for example, depending on what size it is and availability. I mean, most marinas bought their land years ago, now it's like, I can remember when they were talking about building condos down where Trafford's and Chomp is now. And that was actually one of the motive forces behind Luther Blount buying up the land down there, was to stop that from becoming an area that was walled off, in that case, by residences. It's a balance. That's what you're looking for, this balance between residences and business. But as Allison said, there's only, if you're a marine-based business, you got to be on the water for that definition. And that's marinas, it's sail makers, it's yacht clubs, it's those kinds of things.
But it's fishermen, it's,
I'm sorry, what?
it's fishermen, it's
Yeah,
it's,
and fishermen. and all-
underwater technology, it's offshore wind technology, it's testing. It goes way beyond, especially now, it goes way beyond just operating a boat marine. And there's so many different things and innovations happening in underwater, and having the Navy base in one of 2 underwater warfare centers, a couple miles away. And with so much offshore wind, like that's why Blount is doing so well, because they have a contract to make offshore wind boats. And so, if you go right on into Bristol, like right across the line, essentially on Tupelo, and go in there, I mean, you should see the marine trade manufacturers, and this stuff is being built. There's a company there that has a machine that is the only one in the entire country. I think the only other one's in Italy, that's making shells of yachts. I mean, so it's way more than just, putting a boat there.
No, I mean, absolutely, but that's the challenge there is, how do you balance that? And when I originally started this, it's having some guidance to the town council and to us, so that somebody comes in and says, I want to put another restaurant in, and you say, well, is
Yeah.
this the right thing to do here at this point? Have we reached saturation?
And I mean, it becomes a regulation. So I think we just need to identify if it is a concern, if it is a priority of the town, and then we can identify, like Herb and I can come up with some strategies, because there's
I
certainly.
mean, it
tons of
follows
research in other
the
communities.
last comprehensive
Yeah.
plan. It certainly
Yeah.
seems to be, it's one of the unique elements that our town has. I mean,
Yeah.
you could go to Johnston and build restaurants all over the place, and that would be, that wouldn't interfere necessarily with this unique place that we have and its unique geographic positioning. And that's, it's like the goose that laid the golden egg, you have the things are intertwined. The restaurants are attractive because it's an attractive area. The area is attractive because people wanted to live there. The people who wanted to live there in the first place are now feeling pressured to move out. They're not comfortable listening to loud music, to having no parking in front of their houses. I mean, it's an issue, and economic development. Sound economic development takes those things into consideration. It's not just, an approach that what's good for business is good for Warren, because it's not always true.
Has the town gone through any kind of a exercise or study in terms of branding itself or, exploring, because, as economic development, the term is broad, even just some of the individual things that you've spoken about are broad topics or can be taken off into different tangents. Is it worth putting something in the plan that would seek to do that, to help walk the community through an exercise of either branding itself or figuring out what maybe the language is accurate, but everybody's interpretation of what the language
Right.
is going to be a little bit different. So in other words, trying to walk through some kind of a process that would identify that, but also ensure that we're touching base with the stakeholders involved. So, Blount is one of the, main things there. They're a key piece of the history, not only of Rhode Island and legal seafood and all that sort of stuff, Campbell's, but what does it mean for them to be here? And, that maybe they're the example of what is good, because they're still a working, harbor type of business, but they also have a restaurant, they have a place to camp out, they have a store, that sort of stuff. So they seem to have figured out their way to fit into the community, and we've agreed as a community, that's a good thing for the community. But what else do we need? And, I'm just asking the question, is that?
No, I
what we
think
need to
that's,
figure out?
that goes into the potential, we've got all of these nice sounding policies. But I think as an implementation action, that is something that the comprehensive plan can do. I mean, yeah, get the stakeholders together, hold, I don't know what it'd be, a charrette of some sort,
That's one way of dealing. But yeah.
or, here's what it looks like now. What could it look like in 10 years?
Right. So
But Discover Warren does some of that, don't they?
I don't know what.
So maybe that's it. But what I'm just trying to get at is that instead of getting too focused into the specifics, let's keep the plan as the broad brush, kind of vision. Make sure it's succinct enough that we're not, too broad brush where we, it's not defining anything, but to get it to a point where we can, agree around the room, but say, here are the extra things that need to be done, and factor that into the implementation, the action section in terms of things that we need to do. And then we can revisit the plan in the future to fine tune it.
Yeah, no, I think that's key, because I think, I'm almost seeing it as a map, that you're looking at, and here's where we are now. Where do we go from here?
Right.
Because too often we're looking at, what did it used to look like? And that.
I'm just trying to help get off the dime a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's, so let's, I think that frankly, that needs to be ensure the development or redevelopment of the Warren River waterfront enhances and does not detract from its character. That would be the policy action.
And I obviously, I think there's more discussion that you want to have on this. What I would encourage is between now and when you next deal with this, say your next meeting, not only history and culture and all that, but to individually think based on the discussion tonight, say what is that? And either, forward individual thoughts to Allison, so that, because what she could do is probably collect those together, or I can do it, whatever, and then either come back with a matrix or a summary of what was heard from that standpoint. It's easy to ask for that in a meeting. It's another thing to see if it gets done, in time, but that gives Allison some leadership.
Here, quite frankly, I don't see us talking across purposes.
No, I don't either. But I'm just trying to
But I
figure
think
out
you're
how
right.
to funnel some of the discussion into more succinct.
If we see it more clearly, I think
Correct.
it would be,
Yep.
So, that was the purpose of this as a first draft. So.
Does anyone, I know I threw out earlier and jumped all around, does anyone else like a concept of an implementation action of disincentivizing the destruction of historic buildings?
It's in the other thing.
We
It's
can
the
look
other-
back at the historic element. We do get into there's the demolition ordinance that
demolition
the
ordinance.
town has already in place.
Yeah, we talked about,
However, I think within the tourist, so create, leverage the fact that this is a tourist, that people like historic place and yeah, it brings people in,
Maintain-
people, that's why people come to areas to tour these homes. And so leveraging the fact that we do have this, all this history and that could attract people to the town where they spend their money.
Well, and then I'll shut up after this.
No,
If there's a company if there's a building that one time manufactured boats. And then there's someone coming in to buy it and they want to just raise it and turn it into something completely different. That's gonna change the character of the waterfront. If they're disincentivized to do that, and then they still have to work within the confines of whatever this historic, kind of the look and feel of it. It would seem as though some of the stuff we're getting at of not completely changing the character of this area. Businesses could come and go and it would still maintain. That was where my thoughts were.
Well, I'd like to, I think it comes back to an inventory of what do we have there? I mean, we're kind of talking generally about this stuff, and I'm picturing it in real time, what do we have down there? What could be a building that would be, at this point, a lot of the buildings have been restored, a lot of the historic buildings. What they're being used for is, residences potentially, or, an insurance agent or something like that. I mean, I think if we go with what Herb was saying, I like that idea. I mean, I think that also gets a buy-in, because I looked at this originally and kind of thought, okay, well, I'm a little concerned about restaurants, and that was about the sum total. I thought the rest of it spoke pretty well to what we were doing, but I think it's larger than that. I think that there needs to be a buy-in on the part of the people, and I think bringing Blount in, I mean, that's a perfect example. Boat building, seafood processing, a restaurant, a store. I mean, I think in Luther's mind, that would have been the whole of Water Street. It would all look something like that, but it's not going to. And restaurants have their place. I'm not anti-restaurant, believe me. I love.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, for me, when I looked at this, and I do work in economic development, work for a consulting firm that actually did a project that is still ongoing, but started a project called Connect Greater Newport that was with Bristol and Newport counties. So I do have a significant background that I can give you a bunch of information and connections to talk to people who will have this data on hand. And so knowing that and understanding that, when I looked at the plan, I was like, oh man, we're wasting an opportunity, because we can't just think about one area, but what do we want to see the Market Street corridor look like, or the Metacom corridor? But then we have all of Market Street, and there's so much unused potential, and look at the opportunities the TPI is bringing there and what they're making in manufacturing jobs and all those spaces around it. How do we leverage that area that would be great for more manufacturing, that's going to, again, create those higher paying jobs within the town, as well as, redeveloping other areas for the more live, work, play downtown area, and creating a focus on that main street that is still struggling a bit. But I think a lot of it is looking at what are our policies? How do we support businesses? How is their welcome into the town? Because the way, when you keep talking about CHOMP and the way you treat a business owner, that spreads. And so people aren't going to want to open a restaurant here. They're not going to want to open a shop if we don't have a very streamlined approach to bringing new businesses in and helping new businesses to grow and thrive. And it's both Main Street businesses, but it's also those tech-enabled businesses that are in manufacturing and other industries that are industries of the future. And so we really need to look at the town as a whole and not just one teeny little street.
No, I think that that's important. CHOMP got held up because we didn't hold them up. They were held up by the fact that there was an agreement of a sorts, and they went along with it, and then they didn't want to go. I mean, that's a different situation. But more importantly, understanding what are the rules that you have to play by. I mean, if I with that guy, I would have been really frustrated. How much parking do I have? What is this? What are you giving me here? I mean, portioned out the municipal parking in a way that nobody understands. Nobody,
Mhm.
you know, people who go there, I don't know where I'm supposed to park.
I've got the map.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
But in-
Nobody else does.
I think-
Right, nobody else does.
Ashley's point is incredibly important. You know, we had a hyper focus on Medicom. And then we moved to a hyper focus on, you know, the historic district in Water Street. You know, the Market Street area where TPI is and along there, I mean, that's, you know, we've got the farm there, but you've got a tremendous amount of space that could be used for economic development. I mean, that's a prime area for economic development. The Peter King, the owner of Water Roller, has plans for putting in these individual tradesmen's garages. They came before the planning board. You know, that hasn't started yet, but that has a huge potential for economic development. And as soon as you get those, you have support services for those folks. So we definitely need to broaden the focus of this beyond just the historic, you know, the waterfront district. I mean, it's immediate with us now because we've been dealing with it for months, you know. And, well, 8:35, 5 minutes past the witching hour. Yeah. I think we're good. I think Herb's recommendation, as you, I think, Ashley, I think, you know, adding in that business about Market Street and the Medicom corridor, getting back to that. I mean, Medicom may or may not work the way that Bob had originally envisioned it, this kind of multi-use section. But that, we should have a plan B for that as well, because that's an area that has huge potential. I mean, that's where Water Roller built. You know, it was it came out of a crummy little cinder block building that was used for, you know, bad news polluting jewelry. That's where that international company now is. So that, and that other area that's over there, it's a gigantic parking. I mean, it is right for development, but, and a mixed use thing would be great, but if not that, then what?
So think outside the box as a for instance. So somebody might want to locate a business down on Water Street. Why do you require them to do parking? Why don't you allow them to not have any parking, but have them contribute towards, say, a shuttle service where they could park up on, you know, your empty vacant lot up in Medicom. So then you get the person that go, just like you, both of you were saying, you get somebody to go somewhere else, but you're giving them free ride, you know, to be able to get to the restaurant from the shuttle that has, say, 10-minute headways. So again, you're trying to get them to do adaptive use of your different area. You get a business in town that may not normally be able to because you have parking standards and they have no idea where they're going to be able to put the parking. So you have them contribute to something else that affords them parking in a different area, but you're still allowing their customers to get there. Just as that's just a that's happened in other communities. When I'm from Burlington, Vermont. They've done that before.
Yeah.
But in Vermont, they have what's called transit passes enabled in the statute, which says if you build a business and you allow you do something that allows your workers who live out of town to get some transportation, the state has something where they'll pay you a little bit or something like that. Instead of using the employees using parking in the downtown for Burlington, they allow them to park somewhere else and they ship them in. And the developer gets an offset for doing transit.
Yeah, well, we're talking about that, but
Right.
you know, that makes even more sense, you know,
Right.
take them even further away.
Right, the employees get them up there, whatever, and then, but even the parking. At this parking meeting we had a couple summers ago, we talked about that sort of stuff.
Is that the Wayfinder study?
Well,
Is that different? Sorry.
that was part of it, but there was an informal group that was meeting. We had maybe 2 or 3 meetings. The planning board had initiated it. It was, we welcomed community members and a couple of folks came, the police chief and, you know, the town planner and not many people, but, you know, it was the summer of 2021. And we tried to just put our heads together and say, how can we make, you know, this parking problem go away? How can we figure it out? And the shuttle idea that you mentioned, it was one of the ideas. Part of the problem, we're kind of, our hands are a little bit tied right now. We have a really great parcel at the head of Warren, this intercept parking location next to Tourister at this site that's sitting empty because it's jammed up in litigation. So really, like, once that becomes available, if it ever does, that's going to really change everything. But in the meantime, there's other spots too, and we need to move forward with that.
And we talked about, the wayfinding, on computers that, you'd be able to have an app and you'd know
Gotcha.
these are some of the places we can park at. But there is this parking study that's out there, and that's actually a critical part, not only of this, but of the facilities and services and,
Okay.
so many of the other parts. And so that we really need to know where that is. And that was a consultant that the town hired, correct? That's,
Yeah, I think I said that at the last meeting. I tried to find that, but I just,
yeah, no. I mean,
Rerun it
no,
down
it's,
again, so.
it's-
yeah.
Would it make sense to like identify, carry out the courses of action identified in the parking plan under potential implementation actions and this
Yeah, I mean,
Like
because I think that that's critical to,
carry out the.
certainly downtown, but. Again, I think it's important that we don't hyper focus on historic, because that, I think, was the problem with the past one. I mean, there's some agricultural opportunities here that are huge. We've purchased development rights to enormous acreage within the town that is essentially either sitting fallow or is being used for cow corn. That has huge potential, if we got smart and started working with the owners of it, like in terms, the Spencer has, an orchard in one of the fields that's conservation protected. He's growing apples, he has the cider thing. I mean, this is stuff that we really haven't really looked at.
You're saying like keeping it as land, not.
Keep it,
develop-
yeah, I
buildings
mean,
and
you
everything.
have to, but like, let's
Agriculture.
use it for something other than cow corn and, fallow fields, I mean, it's.
Yeah.
So there's this section actually can be a lot larger and more important.
It should be.
Are there other groups in town or committees that, like, I'll incorporate the comments from tonight's meeting, but other stakeholders to kind of send this to the draft to get some comments to the planning board?
I can make introductions to a number. So Lisa Rayola at Hope and Maine would be a great person to speak with. Rhode Island Marine Trades, Susan Daly, I believe, is still there. She would be a great person to talk to. I don't know if you've seen, so the Brookings report from 2016 is the most updated economic development plan for the state that was done. And they actually spent a lot of time in this area within the plan, because they knew that marine trades and defense was going to be such a large piece of it. And so that's a good plan, but I know the state of Rhode Island right now is actually focusing on a new sense for the state. And they're pulling all this together,
Yeah.
but I could send the Brookings report, because honestly, I think the Brookings report in the sense is gonna, even though it was done in 2016, it's still on point the last time I reviewed it. It has a lot of good data and information. Then I talked to like the chamber here, like, because the East Bay Chambers here in Warren,
Mhm.
at Cutler Mill, I would talk to Peter King. I'm sure Dan Shed, he's retired and restarting a new business, but he would be more than happy
Yeah, how
to give
about-
feedback.
How about a questionnaire or something that they could fill out so that they could, give us their input? Peter owns the building that TPI's in, Water Rower, Parker Mills. I mean, is the biggest landowner, not only of commercial, but also residential in town. But from an economic development standpoint, it'd be interesting to see what his vision is
Mhm.
of what economic growth is. I mean, that something that doesn't require, a Bible, but, a couple of paragraphs to,
Well, maybe some kind of a business roundtable a sunsetted group that, could get together maybe 3 times in a 4-month period or something like that, just to basically explore, just like the Peters in the world, they've got minds that
Yeah.
most of us, can't comprehend, and they can always come up with those ideas and the things that they need.
I like it.
I have one more question, and it has nothing to do with the comprehensive plan, but the state of the state RIDLTA April 2023. It's interesting stuff, there was no action or anything, was that just kind of FYSA attachment?
About,
Yeah, that-
the state population,
Yeah.
that extra attachment, yeah, that was informational.
Yep, okay, great.
Background data.
Yeah, no, I thought it was interesting.
Mm.
Thanks.
All right, so motion to adjourn,
Motion to adjourn.
and second.